Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the NYSAC News video update series that we've been holding during this session since January, really. And again, my name is Ryan Gregoire. I am your association's legislative director, and I'm joined once again by our very own Dave Lucas, NYSAC's Director of Finance and Intergovernmental Affairs. Dave, good morning, and welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Good morning, Ryan.
So for our listeners this morning, we're focusing and we're creating a series of NYSAC News video updates specific to the SFY 22 executive budget proposal. The governor released this plan on January 19th. We've provided a comprehensive analysis to our members along with some advocacy tools. And this week, and specific in this video update, we really wanted to focus for our members on two issues and highlight two issues in the governor's plan. And those are the 5% reduction in state aid for county governments across the board and the continuation of sales tax diversion for the distressed hospital facilities pool, which was a provision that was included in last year's budget that was passed in April. So with that, Dave, can you explain to our members what the governor is doing here with these two provisions in his budget?
Yeah, I think our members are pretty familiar with how the diversion works. I mean, they did one for AIM funding last year of about $60 million, and that's been going on for a while now. So the new one they did in last year's budget was $250 million, $50 million for the counties, $200 million for New York City. And it was meant to be put into a pool for fiscally distressed health facilities. The only thing that was a little bit different is how they are taking the money away from counties in New York City this year. Is they're doing in a lump sum actually this week. On Thursday, they're going to take $250 million in local sales tax out of our next sales tax distribution that we should have been getting. And that's going to go into this pool. There's a couple of issues surrounding this where we've been asking a lot of questions of the executive to find out, what are their intentions here. The law states that the money should be used for healthcare facilities that are in fiscal distress. And they assumed during the pandemic that the facilities would come under more distress just because of the circumstances of the work and the PPE and everything they're doing and the inability to raise their own revenue because they can't do elective surgeries. And that happened early on in the pandemic, March, April, May, June period of time that basically a lot of health facilities shut down and they were just working overtime nonstop to deal with the pandemic. Things have abated somewhat since then. But there's been a lot of efforts from our perspective. We've asked the executive, do you have a definition of distressed facility? We've been asking since April 1st of last year. We have no idea what a distressed facility looks like. The other issue to think about here too is the federal government has stepped in with an enormous amount of resources for the healthcare industry because of the pandemic. They've authorized $178 billion in spending. They've only doled out about $110 billion, so a little over half has been distributed. $11.5 billion has come to the facilities in New York, and they deserve every penny of it. They've been severely impacted. But those funds have covered 87% of the revenue losses through the first 6 months of 2020, according to our two senators who helped secure the funding.
And so, there's been no funding from the federal government to offset these revenue gaps for counties.
None whatsoever, and that's a bigger issue. The other thing here too is going back to last year's budget. The governor's implemented and the legislature has approved considerable Medicaid cuts, hundreds of millions of dollars in reimbursements to healthcare facilities. They've also eliminated a lot of the fiscally distressed funding pools for health facilities as part of their Medicaid redesign team 2 proposals. The current budget the governor put on the table cuts another $260 million from healthcare providers, which is very close to the $250 million they're taking in local sales tax for these facilities, which we're not sure they're ever going to end up with the health facilities at the end of the day. It's just not clear at this point in time where this funding is going to go.
Well, and I know from hearing from members across the state, a lot of counties have been reaching out to us saying, NYSAC, do you have a list of where this funding is intended to go? Because I want to know if my local hospital is going to be a recipient, because our county officials are getting phone calls nonstop from the hospital saying, hey, this was a provision that was included in last year's budget. Am I eligible? Am I going to be receiving funds? I need help to respond to the pandemic.
How do I
So,
apply?
Yeah.
They're all legitimate questions. I think what we're asking for the legislature and the governor to do is to put on pause this first diversion of the $250 million that's going to happen this week, and reconsider it. And for the two main reasons is Congress still has to dole out $70 billion in federal assistance to healthcare providers.
Right.
We should see where that goes, and we should see how things work out before you take money from the counties and really local taxpayers, basically to fund what has long been a federal and state responsibility. These indigent care pools and funding for fiscally distressed facilities, this has been over 40-year responsibility of the federal government and the states, and to require local taxpayers to support this, in addition to all the other things that we're required to support under state law. We just think it's a bridge too far at this point in time, and there should be a pause.
What about, Dave, the 5% cuts, across the board cuts the governor's proposing? What should we be doing with that? I mean, certainly the state is under fiscal strain. The governor has included a provision that really, in order to balance his budget for this year, he was relying on federal funds. I mean, what are we going to be doing? What are we going to be looking at going into next year and in this current fiscal year if the governor's proposed budget goes through as written?
Yeah, there's that 5% across the board. We were facing a 20% cut through 2021 state fiscal year, and thankfully that's been pulled back to about 5%, which is positive, but it's still a 5% cut. That's about $170 million for counties off the top. And when you consider our allowable growth cap and our property tax levy, that's
Right.
more than that's allowed. That's more than the 2% that we're allowed to grow.
Right.
That's not an easy cut to take, on top of the sales tax diversion and all these other things that are happening. So there's new programs they've created. They're doing more election reforms, which we're supportive of, making it easier for people to get to the polls. But it would be
But
nice.
there's no funding. There's no funding for that.
Funding. It would be great to have some funding support for that. And there's been initiatives over the years in the last couple of budgets where the legislature and the governor decided to expand the scope of some programs, which are very worthy programs, but they provided no state resources. So it's left to local governments to support these. And this is on top of losing revenue because they take it away and use it for a state purpose at the end of the day. It's highly frustrating for our members to explain this to the local taxpayer about why do my taxes keep going up and I'm getting less service. It's hard to explain that we're trying to help the state, or we're doing what the state tells us to do.
Dave, you and I have had this discussion in the past, and I know we've talked about it on these video updates and in similar correspondence to the members. And, the state's really facing a philosophical discussion point, so to speak, and that is, how are we best in a position to fund the programs that we want to offer to the residents of New York State? What is the most equitable way to fund these programs? How should we be doing it? And do we need to reprioritize some of our resources? So I think you just touched on this. This is a point that we've been harping here locally, but at NYSAC. But the question really is, what level of government is best positioned to deliver these services? How should it be funded? And are there opportunities for us to continue to save money and maybe reinvest it in new programs or existing programs that needed additional support? So with that, I think we'll conclude today's video, Dave, unless you have any other points you want to address. And we'll bring another NYSAC News video update to our members on other budget priorities. Certainly in the coming days here. And I do want to draw everyone's attention to our budget scorecard and our budget impact report. If you visit the NYSAC website, www.nysac.org, you can take a look at that scorecard and the budget impact report. It's very comprehensive. It provides a good picture of what's going on in this state budget. What are some good things? What are some bad things for counties? But with that, Dave, any concluding remarks that you want to share to our members?
No, I think that you had a perfect wrap there. We really need to look at who's best suited to fund these programs, and can we live within our means? We're too many times when there's a little dip in the economy, we seem to go into chaos in our budget making process where there's constantly facing deficits. So we're never in a situation where we could just do the status quo for 1 year and not have to cut something.
Right.
It would be nice not to be in that situation every year.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning into today's NYSAC News video update. Again, we'll be bringing you more of these updates specific to the executive budget proposal. And stay tuned and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.